Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this is the ThieAudio Legacy 2. This is, I believe, ThieAudio's newest as well as least expensive IEM. And what this is it's a $100, $99 hybrid IEM. And maybe those things aren't necessarily that interesting, but I think what is pretty interesting is kind of its position in the market. So, I guess just up front, the driver configuration here. I did mention it's a hybrid. The dynamic driver in there is beryllium coated for those beryllium coated enthusiasts as well. The balanced armature in here is a Knowles driver, so it's not necessarily just the cheap stuff in here. But what I think is pretty interesting about this IEM is that I often get people asking me for recommendations for like a studio monitor under $100, right? So they're looking, often it's like a drummer or a singer, or just last week in the Discord server, somebody asked me, said, I'm in a metal band and I need a monitor for performing on stage. And well, I'm not in a metal band, so I kind of have to use my imagination, but I think you probably want something that sounds relatively neutral, not totally boring, but you really want it to be pretty secure. And under $100, getting that combination of things is frankly a little bit rare and kind of like the most common. It seems like the most common professional monitors out there around $100 is the Shure SE215. And I'm just going to say up front, we'll get into talking about the details, but I think this thing obliterates the Shure SE215. So, like all my other reviews, this is a live stream. If you're watching now, how's it going? If you have any questions about the Legacy 2 or anything else that we talk about today, stick around till the end. At the end of the video, we'll have a little back and forth conversation. But I also want to add that, so this IM was sent to me by Linsol for review. They accidentally sent me two. So I've actually got a second one that I want to give away. So if you want to stick around to the end of the review, I'll tell you how you can get a ThieAudio Legacy 2. And if you're watching the VOD, just a heads up, the end of the video is going to be like 15-20 minutes in, while this video might be like 40-50 minutes long. But anyway, that is enough setup. Let's just go ahead and get talking about the ThieAudio Legacy 2. And we'll start like we typically do by talking about what comes inside the box here. This is actually for a $99 IM, pretty decent little package. In fact, it seems like it's roughly the same as ThieAudio's more expensive stuff, which is interesting. Here's the box, nothing fancy there, but nice box. You get actually a pretty decent little carry case. This is one of my favorite carry cases that come free with IMs, just because it's a nice pocketable size. It's a simple magnetic closure, and I don't know, I think it's pretty handsome. You also get a couple different sets of tips. You get 3 sizes of 2 different styles. I used this style, the black style, just because this is what I've used on other ThieAudio Legacy IMs, and I tend to like these tips. These are actually pretty decent for stock tips. They're not the best standout tips, but they're perfectly solid. This other style, maybe not quite as grippy. The plastic's a little bit stiffer. But the nozzle does appear to be a little bit wider, so you might get slightly different tuning with them, but I probably would just pick whichever one fits you best. And apart from that, well, there's the IM itself. And let's start by talking about this cable, which kind of like the packaging and the other stuff that comes inside of it, this is a little bit standard fare for ThieAudio, which is not a bad thing at all. In fact, you can see I just laid out this cable on the table, how flat it is lying and how soft and pliable it is. This is one of the better stock cables. I believe this is the exact same cable that comes with the ThieAudio Legacy 4, which costs about twice as much as this. So that's actually pretty nice. It's maybe not the fanciest cable or anything like that, but this is like standard issue IEM cable. You got your 3.5 millimeter connector at the bottom with fairly subtle ThieAudio branding on it. You've got a fairly simple Y split here, and then you do have a chin cinch, which is not glamorous looking. It's a little plastic, but it does actually function. And you can see I had it kind of choked up a little bit, which meant I was using it. But yeah, generally a pretty decent little cable. You do have preformed ear hooks up here at the top, and I'll call this out, especially because we are talking about the Shure SE215, and if you are perhaps looking at the Shure SE215, this will be important to you. You do have the preformed ear hooks. They don't have wires in them, which is actually what I prefer. This is like other ThieAudio cables, and I'm going to be repeating this a lot. It's a 2-pin connector, so pretty standard fare there. It is replaceable if you ever need to replace the cable, but that will bring us to the IMs themselves, which, as you can see, is a, kind of a semi-custom design that I think is actually pretty attractive. Look, for $100, this is actually a pretty stellar shell. I think in terms of build quality and stuff, like, they're a little bit on the light side. Like, they don't got like that weight that makes them feel a little bit extra hefty and, maybe a little extra premium. But frankly, these things are built really well. And maybe even more than being built well, they fit really well, which I'll show in a little bit. But I did want to demonstrate or just talk a little bit more about the aesthetic of this thing. So, you can pull off the tip, and you do actually have just kind of open bores there, which you typically don't get on less expensive IMs. I don't know that that necessarily matters, but some people make a big deal about whether or not there's a screen on here. And here you just get the open bores, and there are 2 of them, one for each driver. You can look inside the IM, you can see the dynamic driver, you can see the Knowles balanced armature mounted in here, and just generally, I think this is honestly a pretty handsome look. It seems that these only come in this blue color, which I think is a really nice color, but I kind of think that this is a model that could really stand to have like some other color options. I don't know. Maybe I'm just doing marketing work for Linsol or whatever, but I think that ThieAudio, if these things came in like multiple colors, that would be pretty popular. But yeah, let's go ahead and demonstrate how these things fit. And like I mentioned earlier, these are some of the better fitting IMs, or really secure fitting IMs. It seems to be the exact same shell shape, as far as I can tell, as the ThieAudio Legacy 4, and I had a lot of really good things to say about that. So also going to have a lot of really good things to say about the fit here. So I've got them plugged in my ears. You can see that they fit not like super small, but also they don't stuff up my contra bowl too much. I'd say that this is a very comfortable size and very secure as well. Let me see if I can. I'm trying to do this on camera, so I'm not my finger in the way. But here's just kind of like a demonstration of the security. Is that I can like flick on the cable like this and like tug on it, and it's not coming loose. It's not breaking seal. And that is, well, it's important, I think, for just casual music listeners like me, but I think it's especially important for performers. If you're on stage and moving around, you're singing, talking, stuff like that can very typically break the seal of a lot of IEMs. And well, you're not going to have that problem here on the Legacy 2, which I actually greatly appreciate. Honestly, it might not look like a ton, it might not look like much, but this is one of the better packages, one of the better built IMs that I can think of under $100. Maybe even one of the better ones I can think of under $200. So yeah, really, really pretty impressed there. I don't think that there's anything else I really wanted to talk about. I mean, I guess if I'm getting super picky about the stuff, I did mention they're a little bit lightweight. It wouldn't hurt them if they're a little bit heavier, just to feel a little more substantial. But also, I think worth calling out, these nozzles don't necessarily have the strongest purchase on the ear tips. There was one time that I pulled these things out of my ears and the ear tip was left behind, so worth calling out that. But I think that's going to do it for the physical stuff. Let's just go ahead and dive into talking about the sound signature here on the ThieAudio Legacy 2. And like I typically do, I'm just going to kind of start with the basics. What is the sound signature? And then we'll get into talking about what I like and what I don't like. And the sound signature here in the Legacy 2, honestly, is basically a neutral sound signature. It's slightly warm in the mid-range, I think just the right amount of warmth, which just means that there's not a ton of contrast between the upper mid-range and the lower mid-range. It's just a relatively full mid-range tuning. There is a little bit of mid-bass boost, but more significantly, there's some sub-bass boost. And I think that is, again, a very tasteful amount of sub-bass boost. You could, start quibbling about whether or not it still qualifies as neutral because of that sub-bass boost, but it's not that significant. It's not as significant as the sub-bass boost that you would get on something like a FiO FH3. I would call that a bassy set. This I would call neutral with a little bit of tasteful bass boost. And then up in the top end, the treble, fairly neutral tuned, but it does, I would say, roll off a little bit early. So that is the general tune here. Basically neutral, a little bit of sub bass on top, and a little bit of a treble roll off a little bit early. So What do I like about the sound here on the ThieAudio Legacy 2? Honestly, a lot. I think the tuning on this, they did a really good job with it, especially if you are looking for a sort of monitor IM. You're looking for something to listen to yourself drum, listen to yourself sing, perform on stage, or even just produce music. Like, I think this is a pretty good set because it's, you know, it's not totally boring tune. It's not like the most analytical tuning. It does have a little bit of fun in that sub bass, but it's not to the point that I think it's going to throw off your mixes and make you feel like you're getting the wrong, you're not hearing what you should be when you're producing music. But also for folks like me who are not producing music, and just full disclosure, I don't produce music. But even for folks like me, I think that the tuning on here is sufficiently satisfying and fun, but I guess I would say that because I tend to like neutral tuning. I think, yeah, that neutral just kind of means to me that there's relatively strong emphasis on the mid-range, which is what I think you get here. I think the bass levels are pretty good, decently tight bass with, you know, somewhat deep, a little bit more on the rumble and less on the punch, which just means that it's got the sub bass emphasis rather than a bunch of mid bass. That does mean that the mid-range stays fairly clean though, which I like. There's no muddiness or anything like that. And the bass that's here, you know, again, not a ton of bass, but a fair bit boosted bass. It on the right tracks that play into the sub bass, it's going to give them a nice amount of layering and a decent sense of depth that will come from that added bass layer. And so yeah, I think that in terms of what I really like about the sound here on the Legacy 4, I almost said Legacy 4, and then I said Legacy 4. What I like here about the Legacy 2 is it's a good tuning for kind of everything. Good for monitoring and also not totally boring for audio nerds like us. So, what don't I necessarily like about the sound here on the Legacy 2? I mean, I already talked about it a little bit, the treble being a little bit rolled off, and maybe it's just because, you know, this is a one dynamic driver, one balanced armature. Maybe that single BA is being overworked a little bit. The treble does roll off a little bit early, and I do find that kind of hinders the perception of technical performance here on the Legacy 2. I did some playing around with EQ, you know, and also some sine sweeps to confirm that, yeah, the treble does roll off pretty significantly past like 10K, so there's not a lot of air. But if you take an EQ and pump in a couple extra dB, like even just 2 to 3 dB at like 12K, it actually makes up quite a bit of the shortcoming, and it just kind of goes to underscore how much better this would be, honestly, if it had a little bit extra in that airspace. Mid-range tuning on this too, or I guess the tuning is actually quite solid, but maybe the detail perception is not that great. I think it's probably honestly related to that rolled off treble, but the effect is that the mid-range texture comes across a little bit Vaseline-y, like it sounds a little bit masked in the detail, not overly so, but if we're being picky, that's something I would call out. And then I think also worth calling out is that, you know, the treble performance on here, even though it's a little bit rolled off, in the lower to mid treble can be a little bit on the sharp side, not overly, but it can be with certain music that has some sibilance in it. And I just noted, like the Parcels Live album, the track With or Without You is like not an especially sibilant song, but you can pick out the sibilance here on the Legacy 2. It's not overly harsh, but it's enough that you know that it's there, which actually might be a good thing if you're using this for monitoring. But just know that if you're listening to music that maybe has that baked into it, that this isn't going to hide it like some other IMs might. And so that is roughly what I think here of the sound of the ThieAudio Legacy 2. I wanted to go ahead and pull in a couple of other IMs for comparisons, and we'll rank them in a handful of different categories. These are, as always, pretty arbitrary, but they were the things that made sense to me in terms of comparing these IEMs. And what we have here, of course, the ThieAudio Legacy 2, we've got the Etymotic ER2XR, which is another kind of monitor-tuned IEM under $100, and then we've got the Shure SE215. Now, I do know that Shure has a newer model, the Aonic 3. I have not heard that model, and it seems that they do still shell. Oh my gosh, I'm making a mockery of my own titles, but they do still sell the Shure SE215. So I imagine there's still plenty of artists out there picking up this IM because it's just kind of such an industry standard, and I wanted to bring it up in the context of this video. So we talk about in all the multitude of ways that I basically think the Legacy 2 is better. So let's just kind of start by ranking them in terms of tuning. And just, this is going to be my personal preference. This isn't necessarily which one is the most neutral, which one is the best, or in someone else's opinion. This is just my opinion. How I would personally rank these in terms of tuning. I would say the Shure, you could probably put it way down here. We'll talk more about why. And then these two are honestly pretty similar in their tune, but I would give the advantage to the ER2XR. I think the biggest difference is that there's just a little bit stronger treble extension here on the ER2XR. Like, neither of these are especially bright at all, really, but especially if you listen on a sine sweep, and that's going to come across in terms of the character of cymbals and stuff like that. You can tell that the treble is better extended here on the ER2XR. And apart from that, that's honestly like the biggest difference just in terms of tonality. So yeah, I guess I'll talk about the Shure, even though I put it off screen here. This is just a really, and part of why I don't like this IM very much is it's just a really low-end dominant earphone in the tuning. It comes across really muddy. It's ostensibly a monitor of some sort, and that's kind of how it's sold, and that's how it seems like most people are buying this. But honestly, like, the tuning here is just really bassy, muddy, thick, soupy, and I don't like it. But yeah, that's how I'd rank them in terms of tuning. Let's go ahead and mix these things back up again, and let's talk about technical performance. Which honestly, if I'm gonna be perfectly honest, none of these are especially standout in terms of their technical performance. And again, near the top two, it's going to be kind of a close pick, but I'm going to go ahead and say that the Legacy 2 is a little bit better technical performer than the Etymotic ER2XR, and then the Shure, it's not very good, if I'm perfectly honest. So in terms of technical performance, Legacy 2, I think mid-range detail may be a little bit smeary, but I do think that the imaging is a little bit stronger here on the Legacy 2 versus the Etymotic. The Etymotic is just a lot smoother in the treble. That sibilance that I called out, that again is not bad here, I'm just calling it out because it's a differentiator. It's just not here. Like the ER2XR just really handles treble quite well. It doesn't excel in terms of imaging and sort of that 3D effect to the sound. I do think that the Legacy 2 does that a little bit better, but this is a little bit smoother overall, and this is honestly kind of a tough pick. But in terms of the technical performance, I'm going to go ahead and put the Legacy 2 a little bit ahead. The Shure, again, I'm going to leave it down here in the back. That muddy tonality that I talked about really just kills any sense of resolution. It kills any sense of space and layering in the sound. It just sounds like low end, just kind of droning, muddy, kind of Charlie Brownish. So that's how I'd rank them there. And then the final category that I'm going to rank these things in terms of, and I think this will be relevant for people who, again, are considering these things for performing and for monitoring and stuff like that. I'm going to rank them in terms of comfort. And honestly, this is where the Shure does pretty good. I think the Shure is the most comfortable of the three here. It's just, they're really small buds. I don't know why more IM manufacturers don't use this design. I find this design, the shape, just exceptional in terms of fit, in terms inside my ear, in terms of comfort. These don't fit very deep. They're a little bit on the shallow side, but they create a decent isolation still, and they're very, very secure. The Legacy 2 honestly is not very far behind in terms of comfort. They're just a little bit bigger, maybe even a little bit more secure because of that. So they might actually be a little bit stronger in terms of stage performance and staying in place of your ear. But they are a little bit larger, so I think you'll start to feel them a little bit sooner than you would the SE215. And then finally, the Etymotic. I gotta be perfectly honest. This is not the most comfortable I am, and part of why I think this comparison is really interesting is that, look, if I'm just picking these things based on sound, the Etymotic ER2XR is still my favorite of the three. I still would put the ER2XR a little bit above the Legacy 2, just in terms of my personal music enjoyment listening. It just does a lot right, and a lot of it comes down to just that smoother treble performance that you get here. That said, sometimes it's hard to recommend this thing because this thing fits really deep in your ears. And when you're wearing it, not necessarily the least comfortable thing out there, but the ingress and the egress, taking it in and out, can be a little bit irritating. And if you're in like an office environment or you have to talk to people often, you have to take it in and out of your ears, that can be a problem. And I think the Legacy 2 is actually a pretty nice alternative that doesn't have that downside. This is just a really easy IM to fit in and out of your ear. It all day comfortable, and so that's why, I don't know, I wanted to talk about it here. And so I think that is going to do it for my review of the ThieAudio Legacy 2. Out of 5 stars, I'm going to go ahead and give this thing a very, very solid 4 stars. I was on the cusp, honestly, of giving this thing 5 stars, but I think I'm going to stick with 4. The Etymotic ER2 XR is still kind of like my 5-star standard under $100, but that's also maybe a little bit unfair. Anyway, that is my thoughts on the Legacy 2. Just kind of a really good all-around IM for under $100 with, you know, a nice neutral tonality that has enough bass there to still be pretty fun. I think the tone on here is good enough that you could use this for a studio monitor, certainly better than something like the Shure SE215. And then the fit, security, the quality of the cable, the accessories and stuff that it comes with are really pretty standout at the price. So if you're interested in checking out the Legacy 2, I do have, of course, a link in the description down below. And again, shout out to ThieAudio for sending this in for review. While you're down there, if you like this video, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you haven't already, ding the YouTube bell. And don't go right now because I actually want to talk about how you can get one of these for free. Because like I mentioned at the top of the video, Linsel actually sent me 2 of them by accident. So I've got an extra one. Let's go ahead and throw this on the camera again. This is the extra one, still in the packaging. I got to give this thing away. So if you want this thing, I've been thinking about this week, how do I want to give this thing away? And I figured this is what I would do. All right. Head over to squig.link. If you haven't been there yet, I'll pull it up in a second. Let me roadie wrap the Legacy 2. Head over to squig.link. And if you haven't been there yet, I don't know what you're doing. Let me pull this up on camera. All right, so here we are looking at squig.link. This is my website that I post frequency response graphs to. And as you can see, we are actually looking at the frequency response of the ThieAudio Legacy 2 that I just reviewed. Now, that's not what I wanted to show you here, but here's where we're gonna start. There's a new section of the site that's still a little bit in beta. I have it listed up here in the header called rankings. And if you wanna head over to my rankings, you can also just go to squig.link/list as the URL. That'll take you to this page. And so basically this is what I want you to do. I want you to go to this site and use this tool. And on this page, basically I have kind of an Easter egg link to where you can enter to win the Legacy 2. And basically the way that you can do it is you want to find the ThieAudio Legacy 2 IM on here. And there's a couple of ways you could do that. You could use the filtering tools over here to filter to IMs that are about $100 with a neutral sound signature. And you'll see that the ThieAudio Legacy 2 shows up here. Or you could, let's remove those filters, just use search. And I'm typing on a different over here. You could just use search and pull up the ThieAudio Legacy 2. Once you've got that pulled up, just use the heart function to mark it as your favorite. And what that's going to do, one, it's going to pin it to the top of the page when you come back to the Squig link list. But also you'll see down here at the bottom, it's added this link to enter to win. So just as kind of a call out. So there, I unhearted it, I rehearted it. That link down here appears. Click that. That's going to take you to a Google form where you can basically just fill out a quick survey. I'm kind of looking for some feedback on some stuff like this or related to this. And that'll enter you to win. So that is basically it. If you're here live now, stick around. Let's still have a little conversation. But if you haven't yet, please do head over to squig.link/list. Look for the Legacy 2, favorite it, and then enter to win the Legacy 2 that I've got here and I don't need. So, all right, that is the review. And let's get into talking to the live chatters. All right. Thanks for sticking through that. Let me catch up with the live chat as best as possible. Big Boss, I see you there. You said you want 69% royalties on the funds for the title. Yeah, so just as a full disclaimer, the title of this video, Sure Should Be Scared. We were joking about this on the Discord server, joking about different versions of talking about how Shure should be scared or whatever, because I feel like, honestly, like this is just, there's no reason to buy the Shure SE215 anymore. I mean, there kind of never was, but there really is not any reason anymore. Merci and Ishan and Nan and Darren, nice to see you all there early. Appreciate that. Nan, you're saying, Nan, man, you're scared, man. Planet Jace, happy Wednesday morning, Mark. Please keep your voice down as people are trying to work here, me included. Yeah, man. Early morning in Australia again? That's weird. What's up, Gunnar Jones? Roy, how's it going? Rob Hawk. So Rob Hawk, you're saying you got the Legacy 2 last week and you like it. I'd be interested to hear more about why do you like it. Zion guy saying ThieAudio Legacy 5, get the upgrade. The Legacy 5 is a different model for sure. I would say I prefer the Legacy 5 if I'm just listening for pure pleasure. It does cost, I think, $250, so kind of a different market. But it's also a different tuning. It's not quite the same version of neutral. Again, like I don't produce music, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I feel like if I was producing music and really interested in monitoring myself, I might actually prefer the tuning on the Legacy 2. Planet J saying the Shure 215 was one of the first audiophile earbuds that I bought. So much obliterates them these days. So much. Yeah, I mean, in full disclosure, like I was late to the Shure SE215 game. I bought them maybe 2 years ago when I reviewed Sennheiser's IE40 Pro, because I saw those as kind of competitors and I wanted to have some frame of reference. So I bought the Shure SE215 knowing that it was a popular set and was really pretty surprised at how not good it is. And 2 years later, surprise, it's still not that good. So Big Boss and Roy both seem pretty impressed with the case. Big Boss, you're saying that's the same. Looks like the carry case that comes with the KXXS. It's like a $200 set. And then Roy, you're saying the cable and case looks pretty nice. Yeah, I agree. For $100 set, like that's good accessories. You don't get better accessories with their more expensive stuff. So yeah. Nanmin saying, I love my Aria, but the cable is kinked to hell and back. Yeah, that cable, I actually find that the Aria cable for me got better over time rather than worse. So if it's getting worse for you, my recommendation would be to check out my video on the Roadie wrap and practice the Roadie wrap, because I think that'll help a lot. That cloth covered cable with the Aria, I think, would probably be pretty prone to getting nasty if you're doing the method. Cheeb saying the Legacy 2 looks pretty. I agree. Oh, non-men saying, oh, resin shell, I'm not sure if they would get greasy on my ears. Interesting. Is that a difference? So you said that you had the Aria. Thinking about this, but maybe the resin shell isn't as good for you. The Aria being a metal shell, do you find a difference in terms of, I guess, the way that ear oils interact with it? I don't know. I have not personally noticed a difference, but different ears. Connor Jones saying tweezer hunt for ear tips is no fun. I agree. It's one of the worst things to happen, and it only happened once with the Legacy 2. They're not like, there's been some IMs where the ear tips fall off really, really easily, but because it did happen to me, I thought it was definitely worth calling out. Big Boss saying Mark is slowly turning into Sean Connery, and that was actually the thought I had when I read Cheebs' message about the Legacy 2. I don't think I can do a Sean Connery accent, but it's kind of hard not to when you say a Legacy. JCap asking, why does the camera look half dark? I'm not sure. What are you referring to? You're referring to the fact that there's light on this side and not on this side? It's pretty typical video lighting. But if there's something else, let me know. Roy saying, just got the Etymotic ER2 SE for 49 bucks on Adorama. Hope I will like it. That is a very good set. A little bit on the dull side. That's why I prefer the Etymotic ER2 XR personally. But the ER2 SE is a very, very solid set, especially at 50 bucks. Holy moly. Coffee Beats Official, which is the flattest? And I think flat is kind of the wrong target. I don't know. And flat is a little bit of a misnomer because when you measure these IMs, especially through the microphones that we typically do, almost nothing measures like ruler flat, and that's intentional because something that would measure ruler flat wouldn't actually sound natural to most people's ears. So I think if you actually, that's actually maybe a good reason to go to squig.link, is by default, there's like a dotted line that is my neutral target. Like that to me is what sounds like roughly neutral, which maybe is the equivalent of what you're looking for in flat. And as you can see, the Legacy 2 actually does a pretty good job of following that neutral line. A little bit elevated in the sub bass, but it's not enough to like skew off the tonality or anything like that. It just adds a little bit of extra fun. Omar asking, can I rank them for isolation? I can do my best. I didn't like specifically create loud noises around me while wearing them and attempt to evaluate them. I can say that all of these, in my opinion, isolate pretty well. But based just on again, without having done a very intentional isolation test, I think the Etymotic is definitely gonna stand out in terms of isolation. Just look at that. That's gonna go inside your ear. And these are known for being really strong isolation. And then between these two, I would say they're about even, but maybe a slight advantage here just because it's a little bit thicker shell and it does fit in the ear a little bit deeper, whereas this can be a little bit shallow fit. But honestly, they're all pretty good at isolation. For my purposes, I would not pick between them in terms of isolation, but I know there are definitely different use cases out there where it matters more. And unfortunately, I don't have the best answer for you, except that I'm pretty confident the Eddies will be the most isolating. And I saw Roy, you were saying the same thing. I agree. Acro Year 23 saying, returned my Legacy 2 immediately, hot garbage. Now, that's pretty different impression from what I have, and I know we all have different opinions about these things. So certainly not gonna tell you that you're wrong. I'm just kind of interested to hear more about what did you expect from the Legacy 2? What did it not give you, or what did it do that you didn't like? Elaborate. Oh, Roy saying that website looks clean. Hey, appreciate that. Actually, so the squig.link, the main graphing tool, that's built on top of the open source software CrinGraph that Crinical and another developer, Marshall Lockbaum, developed in tandem. I think Marshall did most of the programming. But that is, squig.link is the graphing tool that I have is built on top of that software. Now, I did make some pretty heavy modifications to the look and feel of it, but I don't want to take all the credit for that thing. The other site, the list specifically, I guess I did do the design and build that one from scratch. So I'll take that compliment. Thank you. Mayor C saying, suppose they couldn't have made the treble extend for more. They're using the bog standard ED29689. That's a Knowles driver, which I don't remember the model numbers on these, so I'm glad that some people do. And judging from the smooth upper mids, they're using high ohm dampers. Interesting. And high ohm dampers kill high treble. Interesting. Okay. There is an audio scientist in here. Alessandro C asking, are these a buy? Just hopped in. And yes, I think if you're looking for a sub $100 earphone and you want a neutral tune, this is going to be one of my top picks. I still prefer the ER2XR for my personal listening preferences, but I know a lot of people scoff at the fit, and you're not going to have to worry about that with the Legacy 2. And if you're looking just for something to perform on or perform with, I think the Legacy 2 is just like a slam dunk. Like, this is what people should be buying for budget studio monitors. The Etymotic, again, I prefer the sound a little bit, but I don't think there's really any need to do that, to wear that, just for performance. Tadakarovsky saying the SE215 was never a consideration. There's still a lot of people buying it. I'll just say that. Nicholas Judd saying, how's it going, Mr. Review Dude? Could I recommend me some IEMs in the $300 range? And honestly, I would check out the website that we just showed at squig.link/list. That is a list of all of the IMs that I have listened to and measured on squig.link. And I've got them ranked by, scores. I've got links to my reviews. And basically you can filter it by price, whatever, you wanted to spend up to $300, filter it by price, look at all the IMs under there. The ones that are 5 stars are going to be the ones that I recommend the most, but I recommend you just dig a little bit more into it, look at the reviews, look at the frequency responses, and try to get a sense of what will appeal to you, because what's 5 stars for me might not necessarily be 5 stars for you. That said, $300, you should probably just get the Blessing too. Ishan saying, been a fan of the Shure SE215. Is the Thie worth switching? I think yes. I can't think of, there's not one thing that I like better about the Shure. I guess I said it fits slightly more comfortable because it's a little bit smaller, but honestly, yeah, I would get the ThieAudio. Especially if you're looking for something, I'm just trying to think how to answer this question the best, to be perfectly honest. If you like the Shure SE215, first of all, don't necessarily listen to my opinion. That's fine. I don't like it, but it is a very bassy set. And if you like the sound of the Shure and you went to the ThieAudio, you might actually be a little disappointed that it's not that bassy. There's probably more sub bass, better sub bass for sure here on the Legacy 2, but you're going to get just a warmer, thicker, bassier sound here on the Shure. I think it sounds terrible. I think the sound's way, way better, but audio is very subjective, and based on what your expectations are, you might not like this as much. But yeah, I think you should probably get it. Or something else. There's also a lot of other IAMs out there. Chris Stroud saying you love mud. Yeah, some people are into it. Tegan Clot Brown saying I'm interested in this IM. I will get this along with a new open back. Interesting. Which open back is on your mind? That's a pretty broad category. Whereone Nation asking, how much do I think the Shure SE846 is worth nowadays? I've actually never heard the SE846, so I don't know how to answer that question. I'll say again, I think Shure really does the fit right. That's one of the things that Shure does really well, is the fit. And the 846 has a very similar fit to the SE215. it's a lot of letters and numbers. So I imagine I would like the way that it fits, but I have no idea what it sounds like. Herman Lazada asking, do you think it's worth it to buy the Legacy 2 and the Arias to have different sound signatures? And yeah, I think so. I think so the Moondrop Aria is another IM that I could have included in this little comparison. And the reason I didn't is that, these three all kind of have the thing that they have in common is that they're, around $100 and they're all roughly kind of targeted for professionals. The Moondrop Aria would be a little bit different here. It falls in the same price range. It's actually cheaper. It's $80. But its tuning is a little bit more on the warmer, laid-back side, a little bit more fun tune. It's got kind of a stronger bass presence than especially these two. A little bit thicker sounding, but honestly, like the Aria is very standout. In fact, I would, if you could, the Aria destroys the SE215 as well. So it has that in common with these two. But I think the Aria I would not necessarily recommend for studio monitoring. Just a little bit warm and thick for that purpose. But in terms of just pure music listening, I do think it's probably a pretty good complement to the Legacy. This being kind of your neutral standard, and then the Aria would be just more of that, not super bassy, but a little bit warmer, a little bit more laid back tune. Yeah, I could see that being a decent combo. Lurdude asking, when will the winner be drawn? So referring to the giveaway for the Legacy 2, I'll probably do it within about a week. And I will email the person who is the winner, but also I'll just like announce on the Discord server that somebody has won. I'm not going to like dox anybody, but if you're curious, if you're like waiting to know, did I win? Check out the Discord server and I'll let people there know whether or not the contest has concluded. It's not really a contest, just kind of a raffle. Gunnar Jones asking, any tri-flange or bi-flange tips that would make decent increase in isolation? Haven't tried them. I don't use any. The only like tri-flange or bi-flange tips that I use are ones that come with IM. So the Etymotic obviously being the tri-flange, but I don't like buy aftermarket tri-flange or bi-flange tips to put on my IM. So I have no help there. Bradford saying, saw the frequency response of the Legacy 2 and had a feeling you'd like them. Do you have any experience with the Sony XBA N3? I don't. I'm interested in checking out the N3. It's an older IM at this point, but it does seem like it's still pretty decent. At least well regarded still, which is good. But yeah, I haven't heard it yet. I believe that one's pretty bassy set, yeah? Adrian Barossa just stopping by to say hello. Hey, thanks for stopping by. Ricky RDT, another IM reviewer, saying that the Legacy 2 is right up there with the Starfields, and I agree. I would personally pick the Legacy 2 over the Starfields or the Aria. It's just closer to my tuning preferences. Shenzai asking, did I check out your song recs from the forum? I haven't yet, but thank you for sending those in. I will definitely check those out. Lunch Break asking, how's the coherency? Maybe with the FH3 as a reference of tonal comparison in general. So I'll just start by saying that like coherency is, in the way that people describe it, is not usually a thing that stands out to me. So for, let's say, the uninitiated, like with IMs like the Legacy 2, right? This is a hybrid IM. It's got a dynamic driver as well as a balanced armature, very different driver technologies, different ways of making sound. And some people will be kind of bothered by the fact that they produce sound differently. People will describe it as sort of an incoherent sound, or there's coherency problems with it. I'm personally just not that sensitive to that sort of incoherency or that sort of coherency issue. And a lot of it really is just that you know, most music that I'm listening to, in the low frequencies, it's going to be a bass guitar and a bass and you know, a kick drum and stuff like that, right? And that's going to have its own timbre versus, you know, a standard lead guitar, rhythm guitar up front, and vocals. Like, those are going to have different timbre. And so the fact that they're being played on different types of drivers, it never really bothers me. Usually when something sounds incoherent to me, it's going to be more about sort of a tonal balance. Like, some IMs, will leave them unnamed. ThieAudio Legacy, no, the Monarch. That was not a very subtle reference. Anyway, some IMs have just like excessive sub bass emphasis, and to me that sounds incoherent. Like, it's just like, where is that coming from? It sounds like someone's got just this weird part, like one of the speakers in the setup just jacked up and the rest of them all playing at a normal volume, and that to me sounds really off-putting. I don't have any issues with the difference between balanced armatures and dynamic drivers most of the times when it comes to these hybrid IMs, and same for ESTs, honestly. I think they all have different characters to them, and they might be pleasant or unpleasant in their own ways. But in terms of like the way that they meld together, for me, it's not really so much a problem, because when I'm listening to music that I like I want things to sound distinct and different. I want instruments to sound like they're coming from different places. So yeah. He did say something about the FH3 as well. I did listen to the FH3 actually just before this review, because I mentioned I was like on the cusp of giving this thing 5 stars. And I wanted to listen to the FH3, which is like it's like $130, so it's a little bit more expensive than this, but that is an IM that I gave 5 stars to. And I still really like the Legacy 3, no, the Legacy 3, wow. The FH3, the FiO FH3. Let's get this stuff straight. I still really like that IM. So I wanted to kind of recalibrate my ears to that, and then go back to this and say, like, is this like actually potentially on the level of the FH3? And I think it's not quite. I think, and a lot of it has to do with the treble tuning on here just being a little bit rolled off. It comes across a little bit dull in comparison, where the FH3 tonally is actually pretty different. It is also a bit of a mid-range tuning, less so in the upper mid-range, but just kind of a more flat frequency response for the mid-range generally. But the FH3 bass, it stands out quite a bit more, especially in terms of the tonal balance. Like, an FH3 is still a bassy set, and I think the FH3 is just a little bit more fun, better with that layering and that 3D effect, which the Legacy 2 does a decent job at, but it's a little bit hampered because of that roll-off treble, I think. Nicholas Judd asking, ever use Shenzhen Audio? Yeah, in fact, I think I ordered something from Shenzhen via their Amazon store just last week. Oh, and Tegan, you said you're looking, when you're talking about open backs, you're looking at the Hyphaman Sundara. You currently have the Sennheiser HD58X. If you haven't already, I recommend checking out my video about modding the 58X, because I think you can make it sound quite a bit better, at least for my preferences. Ishan asking, do I plan to do high-res DAP reviews in the near future? I would love to be reviewing more DAPs. Maybe I'll make some more effort to get more DAPs in-house for review, because yeah, digital audio players, I love them. This is the one I've been using lately, the Hibby R5 Saber. Check this out. I actually got a leather back printed for this. It's just kind of like adhesive onto it so that I have something soft to put it down on. Oh, this is a really nice little digital audio player. I reviewed this one already, but yeah, I would love to review more, and maybe I'll make some more effort. Now that I'm finally getting through this just kind of like onslaught of IMs that I got hit with in June, maybe I'll start reaching out about DAP reviews. Whether or not they're high-res, I don't think I care, but most of them are going to have a high-res certification anyway. Katakarovsky saying the SE846 technicality is just terrible. Someone may like the telephone sound though. Interesting. You seem like you're not a fan of Shure's. sussy. I have not heard the Connext dongle DAC amp. No. Ninmin taking off. Hey, thanks for joining in. It was good having a chat. And then Bradford, you're elaborating. You're saying, I guess to add to my last question, what would you consider a good set for someone who likes the blonde BLO3 signature, but wants to step up in resolution without sacrificing timbre? Hard question, I know. And yeah, this is a pretty common question. People ask me for an upgrade from the blonde BLO3. And honestly, I can't think of anything. Like, the BLO3 it's a pretty uniquely bassy set where it's a lot of mid bass, pretty decent amount of sub bass too, but it's just like a very warm, full sound, which most of the time would be a pretty big negative for me, and it's not my favorite tuning, but it's actually done really well with the BLO3, and I can't really think of anything like that. Maybe something like, I think someone said this in the Discord server earlier this week, and they're not totally wrong. Something like the ThieAudio Neo might be similarly like really heavy in the mid bass and technically an upgrade, but that's also like a $1,700 IM, so I don't know if that's what most people are looking for. My honest answer to that question is that, like, if you like the BLO3 and you like that tuning specifically, you might be stuck. If you just want to explore maybe better technicalities, but similar quantities of sub bass, the File FH3 I think is a pretty good step up. I think people that like the BLO3 would like the FH3, but it is a different tune. Yeah, Recode, I agree. The Monarch sub bass is kind of stupid. I mean, it can be fun, but it's kind of stupid. Rob Hawk, I have not tried any of IMR's IMs. Ugh. I actually have a friend that I think might have a pair that I've tried at one point, but I don't remember anything about it. Cam G, probably not going to check out the Shozy 1.4, unfortunately. Valmanway, is that like a Silmarillion reference or something like that? Or was that like a sword in a, I think I remember that as being a sword in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, but I later found out it was a reference to Silmarillion. Anyway, Valmanway asking, do you think high-end DAPs make a difference in sound quality? Currently own a Plenu 2, but I'm always intrigued by NK high-end stuff. I don't think so. I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time listening to high-end DAPs. I know my buddy Precog, he's got the new Ibeso DX300, which is like a $1,200 DAP that is just massive chunk of audio playing hardware, which is kind of cool in its own right. And he seems to like it a lot, but I don't know. I'll just say up front, like, I have not heard any source, whether it's a DAP or an external DAC, or even an expensive amplifier. I haven't really heard any source that sounds significantly different than most other like decent sources. So that might ruin my audiophile cred a little bit, but I think if I were to be tempted to spend big bucks on a digital audio player, it would be much more about the features, and what it can, like the hardware and the features, and like, you know, how it feels in the hand, how it looks, what, you know, does it have some special software on it? That's the kind of stuff that I would be interested in paying for, and I wouldn't not really expect significant improvements in audio quality. Now there's like, this is coming with the caveat that mostly I'm listening on IMs, and most things are powerful enough to drive IMs to deafening loudness, so I don't need the extra power that you often get with more expensive audio players. If you're listening on an expensive headphone that needs a lot of power, maybe it matters, but even then I'm still skeptical that I would hear much difference. Now, I'm not saying that there's zero difference. I'm just saying that if there is a difference, I'm probably going to have to be listening really carefully for it. And as I'm switching headphones and switching music and stuff like that, that difference I think is going to get lost. That's my opinion. Oh, speak of the devil. What's up, Precog? Not a devil, by the way. Maybe I can bring the A&K SE200 next time. Cool, awesome. Yeah, I mentioned I was interested in reviewing more DAPs. Precog has actually got the Ibeso DX160, which I know is a pretty popular kind of mid-range digital audio player. I was interested in reviewing that, and it sounds like he was going to be kind enough to loan that to me, which is awesome. Das Ninja Sticks, hola. Welcome, good to see you again. Daniel Ebert. Hey, I've got a couple of friends named Ebert. Oh, the first time I'm actually still awake to be able to join the stream. Interesting. So is it late there? Interesting. You in Germany by chance? Zachy, whoa, hi, how's it going? Latte Suo asking value comparison with the new Hanas. Look, the new Hana or the old Hana, they're both pretty significantly different tunings than what we have here in the Legacy 2. Both the Hanas I would describe as like some versions of V-shaped, not like extreme V-shaped sound signatures, but they're not neutral references like the Legacy 2 is here. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is really going to depend on what you're looking for. I think the Hanas are honestly a lot more fun to listen to, and they're just really pretty standout in terms of that imaging, that 3D sense, and just the positioning of sounds around my head. I think the Hanas do an outstanding job, whereas the Legacy 2 here, I think it does an okay job at that stuff. They're not as neutral tuned. They're not going to be as good for, music production. They're not going to be as good maybe at, revealing detail in the mid-range, although I think the original Hana is not bad at that. So they have advantages, but if I had to pick one of those three, I would pick the OG Hana still. Planet Jace, thanks for backing me up. The FH3 is a really fun set. I agree. Planet Jace, you're saying you're thinking of trying out the OH10s. That's the Eco as well for some fun sound. That is still a very fun sounding IM. And even though Eco came out with a new IM, I think that is still the Eco to get. Shuvik asking about the best $500 amp DAC, and this is going to lead back into the talk I just gave about DAPs. I've yet to hear an amp DAC setup that makes me say like, wow, like that is significantly different from what I heard elsewhere. So I would honestly just think about, you got $500, look at the stuff out there that has the features you need, like how many inputs, how many outputs do you need? Look for something that's aesthetically handsome because it's going to be sitting on your desk or wherever for a long time. You have to look at it. Look at something that feels nice. Maybe it's got some weight to it. It'll stay on the table when you're, adjusting the volume knobs or plugging headphones in and out. I personally use a pretty inexpensive shit stack. I've got the Modi 3 as my DAC. I've got a Valley 2 as my amp, and I've also got a Loki, I forget what they call it, the Loki Mini now. It's sort of an in-between. And that's my stack. It's about, I don't know, $400 or $500, I suppose. And that's probably what I would buy again if I were spending that much money. But it's not because it necessarily is the best sounding, because again, they all kind of sound roughly the same. They're maybe the minorest of differences that again, I can pick out if I'm just like listening for that stuff. But for the most part, when I'm just listening to headphones, I'm listening to music, that's not the stuff that stands out to me, and it would not be the reason that I personally pick an amp or a DAC. Precog, you're making actually a pretty good recommendation. In order to pick out the differences, a really good way is to just stare at the price tag and let your brain do the work, which, yeah. And that's honestly, like, that's kind of like part of the challenge that I have with hearing the difference between sources or hearing the difference between, cables and stuff like that, is a lot of the times the way that people describe things is exactly how you might describe it before you even heard it, like just based on preconceptions. And when you hear like your preconceptions coming out of the mouths of people that have heard it, you gotta wonder, are they just speaking their preconception? Like, is it just placebo? And I'm certainly not throwing shade. I'm not saying nobody can hear the differences. I'm just saying, think about it, and think about if it's important to you. Is it worth spending hundreds of bucks on that kind of stuff? Tegan Brown, have I heard or will I review the Open Heart Resin? Nope, haven't heard of that one actually. Chris Stroud, am I going to try the Etymotic Evo? I do believe I have an Etymotic Evo coming in for review. So yes, stay tuned. If that comes in, I will probably do an initial unboxing and measurement of that. Oh, Valman Way, thank you for confirming your name is a reference to the sword in Symphony of the Night. If you didn't know, I do think it is a Silmarillion reference, which is related to the Lord of the Rings and some nerdy stuff that I got into in high school. Daniel Ebert, you are in Germany. Interesting. My Ebert friends, they are from Germany. Ebert maybe is probably how I should be saying it though. Bradford saying, just looking at graphs on Squiglink, it looks like the U12T, the 64 audio with the M15 module is the closest thing to what I'm looking for. If you're looking for a blonde BL03 upgrade, yeah. And I do think the U12T is quite a bit better than the 64 audio Neo. I think it's a little bit lighter in the mid bass. So if you're looking for like commensurate levels of mid bass to the blonde, the Neo's probably a better match, but if the mid bass levels on the U12T will satisfy you, I do think that is a significantly better IM than the Neo. Planet J saying, people that talk about DAPs having better tone or note textures scare me. Yeah, I don't know. Again, like, I'm certainly not trying to sit here and throw shade at people that say this kind of stuff. I just know from my own experience, like I've come away saying things, like, and even just like thinking that I'm hearing things, but then like when I test myself in any sort of quasi-blind A/B test, like those differences really just disappear. And whether or not I actually heard the difference when I had like the sighted testing, or whether or not it was just all in my head, actually doesn't matter to me. What does matter to me is that when I don't know what I'm listening to, I can't tell what I'm listening to. And that ultimately is what matters to me. When I'm switching between IMs, I can tell which IM I'm listening to, because they've got different sound signatures and different qualities that to me are a lot more tangible and significant than the differences between sources. Ult Raw, no, I have not tried the Canera Nana. Neither the new one or the old one. Shovik asking, is there a significant difference between dual AK4493 and 4497 DAC chips? What do you think I'm going to say? I actually don't think I've heard of 4497, so I can't say with confidence that there's no difference. I'm just going to say that I expect I would hear no difference. Certainly no significant difference. Joseph Pachero, have I tried the Tanch Gym Oxygen? Greetings from Philippines. How's it going? I have heard the Oxygen, not for a super extended amount of time. I had a buddy, Sean Dent, actually sent it over to me to check out, and from what I remember, it sounds exactly like the new Hana, the new 2021 Hana. So yeah, both of them are very, very solid IEMs. A little bit on the bassy side for my tastes, but just keep in mind, I tend to like a little bit less bass than most people. Marvin Marker asking about any chance of reviewing the Meze Rai solos. Probably not. It's a bit of an older IM at this point. I'm not that interested enough to go out and spend money on it. If Meze was interested in sending it in for review, I'd check it out, but probably I would not expect that one. Cam G asking, is the Hana 2 a worthy upgrade to the T4, or should I get a Blessing 2? I think that difference should be much more about what you want out of the sound and less about thinking about in terms of levels, like thinking of T4 here and Hana here, and then Blessing 2. Like, I know that's how they're kind of like stratified in terms of pricing, but I wouldn't think of them that way necessarily in terms of audio quality. I do think both the Hana and the Blessing 2 are better than the TIN T4. But I don't think that I would say that the Blessing 2 is absolutely better than the Hana. I think the Hana does some things better than the Blessing 2, honestly. But ultimately, I personally prefer the Blessing 2, but it's because of the neutral tonality and just really strong mid-range resolution. Whereas the Hana and the new Hana, I think they do better with bass, and the treble's actually less bothersome for me on the Hanas than it is on the Blessing 2. There's also the fit difference. That's going to be a pretty big difference. So again, like, I know you want me to say, like, kind of describe things in this sort of like stratified sense, but I don't see it that way. I see the Hanas, whether the old Hana or the new Hana and the Blessing 2, I see them as, you know, in the same vicinity of audio quality. They just do different things and they have different strengths. And so figure out which one of those you want and go that direction. Big Boss making a good point. The 4497 is 4 larger than the 4493. So dual chips, you would actually have 8 more audios. That's good math, yeah. What have I done that math on before? Looking at frequency response, right? Let's say you're looking at 2 IMs that maybe are identical in their frequency response, but let's say between 100 hertz and 20 hertz, there is like a 2 decibel difference, right? You might be tempted to say, let's say it's a 1 decibel difference. You might be tempted to say 1 decibel, what does that matter? But no, you're talking about from 100 to 20, that's 80 decibel or 80 frequencies times 1 decibel. That's 80 decibels you're talking about. Think about how loud, I'm just kidding. That's made up math. Don't listen to that. And Bradford, yeah, if you're looking for a little bit less mid-bass than the BL03, the U12T is a pretty solid direction and rip your wallet indeed. Yeah, it's a $2,000 IM, and it sounds phenomenal, honestly. You could probably stop there. Joseph Puchero asking, is the Moondrop Aria a good upgrade from the Blonde BL03? It depends on what you're looking for, if I'm honest. Like, they're pretty different sound signatures. I think the Blonde's a little bit woolier and a little bit fuller, a little bit bassier. The Aria is still a fairly bassy set, but not like overly so in the way that the Blonde is. But if I'm perfectly honest, if I'm just going purely on sound, like, I would kind of describe them as about equals. They're different. But yeah, I think, folks, it is about 6 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the questions in the chat. Again, if you haven't already, do check out squig.link/list. Mark ThieAudio Legacy 2 as your favorite and enter to win to get your own ThieAudio Legacy 2. I got to give this thing away. Otherwise, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button down below. It helps me out. Subscribe to the channel. Ding the YouTube bell. Join the Discord server if you want to talk to me before my next video. And have a good week. Cheers.